why we think the Raptors will beat the Philadelphia 76ers. Tiago, you say the Sixers' lack of depth.
Yeah, I mean, especially with Thibault out, I do think Thibault can be a very impactful player in this series, but he's not going to be playing in Toronto for some absurd reasons, man. We're not going to talk about the logic behind why he's not getting vaccinated. But here's the thing: Toronto has depth. I mean, they don't have a lot of impact players. They do have depth, and they have depth. They can go a little bit bigger. They can go smaller. We talked about that ad nauseum in this podcast. To me, it's a question of, is Doc Rivers going to utilize his bench in the way that we feel his bench should be best utilized, right? So we talked about Paul Reed. Isaiah Joe is another guy who's shown a little bit of defensive potential. Longer guy, can move around a little bit better than most of his wing defenders. I don't have faith that Doc Rivers is going to do that. So I'm pretty certain that Doc Rivers is going to dive back into what he knows, which is his own vets, his own players, DeAndre Jordan being a primary guy off the bench as his rotation piece. So if that happens, the Sixers are in trouble. They're in trouble. They're flat out trouble. I mean, we talked about this. DeAndre Jordan matching up against Toronto's athleticism and size and lineup versatility is a problem. It's just not going to happen. Boucher's going to be getting wide open looks from three. So those things concern me. And if that becomes a series of, Doc's rigid mindset against Nick Nurse's flexibility, the Sixers are going home.
Yeah, I agree. Sean, you say James Harden being neutralized.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's been talked about a bunch, but you can tell the lack of pop or explosiveness hasn't necessarily been there for James Harden. And facing a team loaded with length and athleticism, that's going to be put on display. It's going to be put to the test. And when looking at these past Raptors games, it hasn't been the case as much as I guess I expected it to be. He's still had his looks and kind of simply just not hit them really. But I think that if he is wrapped up, just thinking back to the trade, so much of the hope was that he could take this portion of the offense and take the shots that were available and capitalize. And he just kind of has not hit on those lately. And if they are able to swallow him up, that kind of messes up the whole flow of the Sixers offense. So putting James Harden in a box would not bode well for the Sixers. And I do think there's a chance this Raptors defense is capable of it.
I'm just going to piggyback off of that with my number 3. And that is, I think, one of the underrated players in the league, one of the underrated players on the Toronto Raptors, and that is the rise of Scottie Barnes. I think this is just a incredibly versatile player, especially defensively. He's clearly way on the bottom of the totem pole offensively for this team. But he's also probably going to be the guy that's left wide open from three on the perimeter, for better or worse. But you look at kind of his last stretch of 20 games, man, he's averaging 18 points, 8.4 rebounds. He has a plus 4.1 net rating in March. And you look at the 2 games versus Toronto, he's got the most defensive possessions defending James Harden. He's held James Harden to 6 points on 3 of 6 from the field, 0 of 1 from 3, 10 assists, 6 turnovers, and 67 plus possessions. So if you don't know Scottie Barnes' name, you're going to know it by the end of this series because he's going to be all over James Harden. So I think Scottie Barnes, maybe not offensively is one to worry about, but I think defensively he's going to be a thorn. He's going to be a thorn on the Sixers side for sure, on James Harden's side for sure. We're going to roll on to Tiago for his number 2, and that is Raptors in the clutch.
Yeah, man, I love Scottie Barnes. I think he's going to be a better version of Pascal Siakam. I think he's going to be one of the top players in the NBA in 2 to 3 years. So definitely pay attention to him. Raptors are a very, very good clutch team. I mean, on both ends of the court. So Scottie Barnes, name you just mentioned, Chris, I went back and looked. He leads the NBA in clutch time steals with 9 by far. I mean, that's a guy who he's going to be on the court late in games, creating havoc. They're a top 10 offense in clutch. They're a top 10 defense in clutch. The Sixers are not a top 10 offense in clutch. They're barely a top 10 defense in clutch. So when you talk about close playoff games, game on the line, the Raptors execute at a very high level consistently. And that I will guarantee you there will be 1 or 2 games this series where Philadelphia is going to be asked to deliver late in the game, and if they're not pristine with their execution, they're going to lose. So if this becomes the story of the series, they're going to lose the series because Toronto is a much better late game execution team, which goes back to, once again, coaching, which is a massive gap in this series.
I mean, you look at the 4 games in this regular season. In game 1, it was a tie game with 2 minutes remaining. Game 2, it was a tie game with little over a minute remaining. A tie game with a little over 2 minutes remaining. And game 4, the Raptors had a 4-point lead with 2:46 remaining. Every game here was, decided with 2 minutes remaining. So I agree, Tiago. Sean, yours is the transition battle.
Yeah, similar to kind of how in football games can be won and lost in the trenches. I kind of feel that way about this series in transition. Looking at the Raptors, and these are the stats we talked about earlier, but second in forced turnovers and third in fast break points versus the Sixers 28th in transition defense. That's something that absolutely needs to be capitalized on, and the Sixers has to be a focus. It's something that's been talked about all year, but it still hasn't really been fixed. And it's hard because it's one of those things where it's just like, you just have to get back and get set. Like, there's not really like a coaching fix. It's just you have to do that. You have to do it quicker than the Sixers have done it, and I don't have a lot of confidence that will. The Raptors are super fun to watch in transition. They're very efficient the way they do it. They space the floor right. They have guys running in clear lanes, and they obviously capitalize on it. It's a huge part of their game. That's where Scottie Barnes does do his damage offensively. He's probably the number one guy I would say to watch in transition. But they all can do it. Everybody can handle the ball. And if the Sixers are not able to stop that, if this becomes a track meet of a series, the Sixers are not going to be able to hang in there.
Yep, I fully agree with that. I was thinking of ways the Raptors will beat the Sixers, and I'm just doubling down on James Harden here. And for me, my number 2 is the Raptors torture chamber. I mean, James Harden, you nailed it, guys. I'm not going to repeat it. Like, he's clearly consistently struggling to create for himself this year. His first step and lift are clearly not there. They're clearly not there. But if this guy is not that number 2 bona fide scorer in this series, shut the door, end the series, it's over. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. You look at just this length and versatility of this Toronto Raptors defense, man. They're going to be hunting James Harden. Like, James Harden is predicated on finding the mismatch, and exploiting it. I don't know if he can do that in this series, and it's going to be arguably the story to watch. Just Toronto has just a revolving door of just stout defenders that are just going to make James Harden, our shot creator, a living hell. So that's it, man. Like, you could just watch the tape. Like, Precious Achiuwa, like, on one defensive possession, he'll be battling down low with Embiid. The next defensive possession, he'll be defending James Harden on the perimeter, man. They're loaded. They're absolutely loaded, and that's just I just doubled down on that one. Tiago, your number 1 is the Raptors pace and grab.
The way you worded that's kind of weird.
I know. I couldn't figure it out, but I tried my best. I only got this little box.
I don't even know what you mean by that, to be honest. I think you mean like offensive rebound, right? They're an extremely aggressive team, and I do think when you watch the Sixers during the regular season, it's not kind of what the team you're going to see in the playoffs. So the Sixers are more of a veteran-laden team. They're slower. They don't really take certain games seriously in the regular season. And you put that against the backdrop of like a Toronto team who hustles on like every single play. It's like a dark contrast, right? So the running, the rebounding, it's a big deal. So we talked ad nauseum about like guys who just don't have the pop on the Sixers roster, right? So for instance, a guy like Georges Niang, who should be part of the rotation because of his shooting, his spacing element. But when you watch him defensively, like, he can't move. So offensive rebounds becomes an issue. Dribble penetration becomes an issue. Ball move becomes an issue. So if Doc's going to put, for instance, Niang and Tobias Harris on the court at the same time, that's a problem. You need guys who can move, cover spaces, and deny driving lanes and rush the glass. So We'll see if Doc has some of these answers figured out by game number 1. If he doesn't, you're going to see Toronto's aggression just be amplified, and they could Philly could seriously fall in a trap of just trying to play catch up, and they're not going to win that battle. It's just not going to happen. So.
Yeah. One thing's for sure, Doc is going to have to make adjustments multiple times, maybe at least multiple times per game. And I don't know. I just don't have it. We're going to get into just real quick series predictions after this. But Sean, your number 1 here is the Nick Nurse factor.
Yeah, I mean, we can look at the players' matchups and everything, but the biggest difference in these two teams, I would say, is the difference in coaching. And Nick Nurse, terrific basketball mind, has done a tremendous job in Toronto. This whole system that they have in place, he really has made changes throughout the season, too, to get them running like this. And if it's a matter of in-game adjustments, the Nick Nurse versus Doc Rivers, I just don't see it being close. So I have some real concerns that he's going to scheme things that Doc doesn't have an answer for, and I think that's the Raptors' biggest advantage overall in this series.
I fully agree with that. And that's kind of like goes into my end, but it's more Doc. The DeAndre Jordan minutes, man. DeAndre Jordan minutes. It is what it is. You look at Embiid's off the court numbers at the last 2 games of the regular season this year, minus 23 when he's off the court. You look at last year's playoffs in 2021 when Joel Embiid was on the court in last year's playoffs, plus 14.7. When off the court, the Sixers were a minus 5.2. Dwight Howard was a minus 8.1. You look at this year, the Sixers are plus 7.5 with Embiid on the court, a minus 4 with him off. The Sixers are a minus 7.4 with DeAndre Jordan on the court this year. So it's the same freaking problem. It's the same Doc Rivers. It's the same thing that scares the living crap out of me at night. And I can't sleep. So that's got to be it. Like that third to fourth quarter swing could be just, again, the nail in the coffin for the Philadelphia 76ers. If, like we had in the comments by Nick, like if Paul Reed is not in there, just at least giving us some help defense, some transition buckets, some help on the offensive glass. I don't know what we're doing here, man. Like that we're going to know everything probably game 1. And that might be just shut the door, end the series, just turn off the TV. I'm going to be furious. So
Chris,
for me, that scares the living crap out of me.
Can I make a point on the coaching? Because if we go back to game 1 of that playoff series in 2019 against the Raptors, where the Sixers took an unbelievably talented Raptors team to game 7, and it took a Kawhi Leonard buzzer beater to win the series. If you go back to game 1 of that series, Kawhi Leonard went off, right? If you guys remember that, he just went off on Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler was a primary defender. I just went off. He scored like 100 points. Game 2, Brett Brown, who many people consider to be a much inferior coach than Doc Rivers, made a very critical adjustment in that series that completely changed that series around. So he took Jimmy Butler off Kawhi, put Ben Simmons on Kawhi. Same time, he decided putting more and more size on the court, which made Toronto's life a living hell. There's even quotes in that series about Toronto players saying, like, we could not deal with the Sixers size. We thought, like, this is it. There was just too much size on the court. So you saw a coach who at that time swallowed his pride and made the adjustments necessary to try to win this series. So like, ultimately, Kawhi Leonard took it to the next level, and he just flat out won that series. But I thought that 7-game series was Brett Brown's finest coaching moment as a Sixers coach. And it all started with swallowing my pride. Is Doc Rivers going to be doing the same thing when DeAndre Jordan is out there getting roasted in game 1? We'll see.
Yeah. And can I say, with the Paul Reed specifically, like, I feel like it's genuinely just Doc having his heels dug in on, like, not wanting to admit he's wrong on it. Like,
100%.
I think you have to realize it. It's just he doesn't want to go back. Yeah. So it's not as simple as that, because it's obviously quite hard for him to do, but it's purely a swallow your pride and make the right basketball decision.